Okay, hello. We're starting the invited talk session, so I'm very pleased to introduce our invited speaker, Jonathan Albright. Jonathan just started a job as a research director at the Tow Center of Digital Journalism at Columbia University. He was previously a professor in the School of Communications at Elon University and will soon be also a faculty associate at the Berkman Center. So I actually first heard of Jonathan's work through The Guardian, so in the newspaper. It was in December last year, and it was an article titled Google Democracy and the Truth About Internet Search. It was both fascinating and terrifying. I encourage you all to read the article. And it talked about how search results are being biased by a political machinery that is a propaganda machine, effectively. And this is exactly one of the topics that Jonathan has been working on. So when we were thinking of who to invite with Damon and Rachel, who to invite for our keynote, we thought that this topic would be of interest to the pets community. We hope it might inspire some of you to look into these topics. And I'm looking forward to hearing what Jonathan has to say. Jonathan has said that he prefers to take questions during the talk. So if you have a question, raise your hand, and we will have a more interactive session than just the full talk and then the questions at the end. Okay, you have the floor. Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me? Is that okay? All right. Okay. So, hello. I appreciate the invite very much. This is not my typical audience for presenting, but I think that it's a great opportunity to show some type of work that I've done. My work is really interdisciplinary, and I think that like my goal here is my intent to come here and present was really to kind of hand off some of this research or hand off some of this data to people here to look at it in terms of tools, to look at it in terms of privacy initiatives, but especially tool building. And I'm going to share some data after my talk, just to kind of one of my larger data sets that I haven't released, just to kind of incentivize this whole process. And yeah, if you have a burning question, I'm happy to kind of, I don't want to completely slow down the presentation, but if you have like a burning question, I'm happy to kind of take that as we go along. I feel like waiting till the end and kind of crowding everyone at the end and trying to fit in a couple questions it's less productive than doing it the other way around. So looks like the projector is not.
Lost the projector? Who can fix this?
It was on earlier and working perfectly fine. I mean, that always works, or yeah, turn it off, turn it back on. It's VGA, HDMI? It's HDMI, but it was, it was working like. I think it's switched to VGA. Yeah, there you go. All right, let's see here. Are you kidding me? Really?
When you moved it disconnected, so that makes me think it was just.
I just registered. I might take a second. There we go. I was really worried for a second there. Are we still good to go? That's my background, actually. It keeps me like calm and productive. The green screen. Is that weird?
When I started Sun, my manager's background display was the Microsoft Street of Death.
The B-sod? I've lost my window that I had up, which is kind of a problem. I'm just.
Try the gather windows, perhaps?
Yeah, I just got this new Mac, and I'm like clumsy. I'm not perfect. Okay.
Can you ask questions?
Not quite yet. Oh, we're gonna play this game. I'm like making horrible typing mistakes. I'm like clumsy with the touchpad. I'm dragging things into the wrong folders. It's crazy. Okay, here we go. So I just called this navigating influence networks. I'm focusing my talk a little bit more on emotional responses. My kind of working hypothesis from the kind of start of, I guess, the post-election atmosphere is that a lot of things are going out, a lot of content, a lot of tweets, and for the purposes specifically to be captured and kind of used and recycled back into audiences, especially for kind of trial balloons. So I'll talk about this later, but my work is kind of focused today specifically on kind of the infrastructure behind, I guess, the broader fake news problem. And it's focused mostly on Brexit and the US election for the most part. But it applies to politics in general. So when the election was kind of wrapping up, I was really interested. I was seeing a lot of data work, and I was seeing a lot of claims about Cambridge Analytica, which was a company that has worked on, well, allegedly, I should say, worked on Brexit, but also worked for Trump and Ted Cruz as well, and actually did a little bit for Ben Carson. So they kind of were working for multiple people in the primaries, and for the general election, they jumped over to the Trump campaign. So, there's a lot of talk about models, and oops, I wanted to go back here. So this is a record from the Federal Election Commission of payments made to Cambridge Analytica. So this only includes kind of payments that were made to the company that came directly out of campaign funds. So this wouldn't include things like super PACs or other types of sources. But if I totaled this up just to kind of look at the data. But people, there's a lot of arguments about were they effective, were they not effective? Did they do anything for Trump? Does their kind of profiling, does their behavioral targeting, does it work? Yes, yeah, I do. Yeah, I can share this. But I mean, almost $12 million. I mean, that's not a small amount of money. So say what you will about Cambridge, but these payments are quite big for just kind of a random small data firm that is kind of up and coming. So one of the things that interested me in my current track of research was really looking at, okay, well, there's a lot of effects. There's a lot of fake news, people calling these stories that are coming out fake. But where is it coming from? Like, where's the traffic? And where's the flow of information? So I started to look, especially at Google, and do a few different kinds of searches. And Google kind of forces you into the query mode, right? I mean, I'm old, and I use keyword searches on Google. I kind of, I type in like multiple keywords and use but I've noticed that, Google has really trained, and a lot of the other search engines have trained people to kind of submit their queries in a question form, simply because like they want to train their AI systems and their kind of natural language processing. It really helps with that. So one of the queries that I put in kind of around the end of the US election was why Brexit won. And sure enough, like the top result that came up, this was before Alex Jones was quite as infamous as he is now, was InfoWars. So ranking above the BBC. I mean, so I saw that, I started to see this kind of gaming of SEO and the gaming of search algorithms in particular for placing sites that really shouldn't be at the top of Google for major issues and major topics. I mean, these sites don't even deserve to be maybe in the first 3 pages, much less the first. So I took a sample of, there were a lot of lists going around. I mean, I'm sure that people here probably are familiar with the lists that were being circulated of fake news sites. You get the Google Docs or the Google Sheets share. One of these one of them was started from, I think, Melissa Zimdar's. And it was basically a spreadsheet full of sites that were kind of confirmed to be dubious or not credible or biased, hyper-biased, I would say. So I started looking at the sources from, like how is this, like, sure, Facebook is really important in this conversation, and Twitter is really important, but like what else is going on? So I started to see that there were a lot of direct URL referrals, and there was a lot of organic search referrals, so not sponsored. And this comes from SimilarWeb, which I found quite a bit more reliable than Alexa for this type of, because these sites aren't really highly ranked, and Alexa's great for sites that have a lot of traffic, but I think that SimilarWeb is more accurate for sites, kind of these smaller sites. So more or less, say 40 to 50% of the traffic is coming from these fake news sites. I'll use air quotes, from social, from especially Facebook. But you start to see kind of these direct URL referrals, which lead you to think that maybe these are being shared through text messages, these are being shared through kind of IMs. People are bookmarking these sites, email campaigns. So there's a lot of old school, less glamorous, I guess, technology that Facebook is amazing to study. It's a brilliant, but you don't want to go, people aren't interested in kind of researching email anymore. But it's still really important. So I started kind of looking at this and this type of data that's being collected. One clarification before I get into the data part is, I think that big data is not a really good term for when you talk about this kind of election data. I think that actionable data is actually it's a little bit of a marketing buzzword, but it's data that can be used to, I guess, influence not just attitudes, but I think that it's data that can be used to influence behavior and kind of in a measurable and observable way. So just to move on through here. So patterns that you see from companies that work in ad tech. Takey is one of them. They're in New York City. I spoke with the founder of that. And one of the things from sentiment-wise is Trump was this negative, and every kind of event, every debate, he just kind of reinforced this kind of negative aspect of it. And this kind of leads to the conclusion of how could he win with everyone hating him and everyone angry. So, but outrage works, and it gets people out to vote. So I'm just going to go through this kind of, I call it the data industrial complex. So it's kind of using data to target and also influence people, not just from an attitudes or perception or, but actually kind of observable behavior. So I'm just going to move on here. Facebook is a huge part of this in terms of sentiment. It's prompting people and kind of training them to log how they feel, where they are. And check it. I mean, most people here work in privacy. You know this already. So, this is one of the search results that I did for Brexit on Facebook. It was a similar result. So this is the kind of messages that people are getting in there, not only in their news feeds, but also when they type in a search on Facebook. So my point is that I wanted to look at the list of, I guess, fake news sites, or what people were calling fake news sites. And I wanted to, there's no way to make sense of it. And I guess the way that I wanted to look at it, I come from a biological sciences background, from kind of, I guess, a biochemistry and cell biology background. So I just thought that, infographics are fine, spreadsheets are fine, numbers are fine, but this is kind of something that needed to be mapped out, and this is something that needed to be visualized. And that's a challenging project. Especially with one older MacBook. This is the new one. That MacBook is dead, actually. I think I killed the graphics card in it. So I wanted to look at the network structures because, with a list of, say, 120 sites that are, known to be purveyors of misinformation, you can capture everything in between. I guess that was my, with the network analysis, you can capture every site that's connected in between all of those sites. So I'll show you the kind of initial map that I did quickly. I will drag this over. And you're welcome to look at this after we're finished up here, obviously. This is on Medium. And I thought about sending this to a journal, but I need to move out of. There we go. Oh. Are we out of full screen? Yes. So I'm just going to show, this is kind of my initial research, and this is the work that caught on with The Guardian. Actually, Matthew Ingram, he's a Fortune, or he used to work for Fortune, I should say. He's a senior tech reporter for Fortune, was the first person to give me actual press on this. But this is some of my initial work. And I kind of started looking at this ecosystem and this structure, and I was seeing patterns in how these sites are connected and which actors are in between, especially, and so this is mapped, or the size of the nodes on this network are mapped by in degree. So how many links are going in, because URLs obviously are going to always be directional. So basically, I started to see patterns that kind of showed or suggested that YouTube was actually one of the kind of sites that was possibly being overlooked as part of this kind of fake news infrastructure, or part of this misinformation infrastructure, propaganda, I should say. So beyond Twitter, beyond Facebook, YouTube was a central, or this kind of suggests that YouTube is a central actor. I mean, with the amount of links going into this, thousands and thousands of links. So just to move out of this. So what you see when you kind of map these out is that you see like the kind of major players, but you also see the clusters. You see the kind of like things naturally kind of cluster and aggregate around certain issues and certain actors. And when you map the web, or what's left of the web, I should say, because it's being kind of eaten away by apps, you start to see, you can see patterns in which players are intermediaries, like which players are in between. And the go-to example for this that I show is Wikipedia. The proximity is very, like how things are arranged isn't that important on this network, but the proximity is. So the fact that where you have Reddit, you have Wikipedia, WikiLeaks, and RT, and actually InfoWars is up on the corner there. In very close proximity, suggests to a certain degree that information from WikiLeaks and the leaks is kind of filtering or finding its way into Wikipedia articles. So this is it's an interesting. It was an interesting. This is more observational, but with these networks, you can kind of trace it back, and you can see maybe why. So I started pulling out some of the unique URLs from this particular data set, just to kind of confirm the kinds of things that were going on. So one of the top YouTube URLs was Southfront. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, but it's essentially like, it's a military propaganda site for pushing action on Syria. I shouldn't have gone there. I did not. Yeah, and it'll recommend that for the rest of my life, probably. So one of the things here, and I had to, I spoke with other people when I started to look through the unique URLs, kind of the most shared URLs in this particular data set, not the most common, but these kind of the most common unique. And one of them was IP masking. So my initial hunch was that people are anonymously logging in, or as anonymous contributors to Wikipedia. This is why the IP masking. I mean, there's in this data set, these are the things that kind of make sense. So you get some interesting ways to explore further. So I think that when you do network analysis, it's not giving us the answer, but it's giving us like the path forward. So that's kind of my initial take on this. So let me go back to my presentation to get into tracking. So I'm pushing kind of network analysis here simply because the flows of information and where things go, where things start, and where kind of information circulates, and kind of how it ends in terms of where it's sent and kind of where it begins and where it ends. But tracing in between, I think, is really overlooked in terms of research. And I'm not talking just media and communication research, but I'm also talking kind of just any type of information or data science. So this is an example of kind of an interest, and I call them interest and issue clusters. So that's Donald Trump's Twitter. This is from that first larger map. It's a close-up. But when you look at the kind of group there, there's websites, there's Facebook profiles, there are blogs. So I guess this is the kind of data that you capture when you do larger scale analysis, rather than like, okay, well, which Twitter accounts are retweeting Donald Trump? Like this kind of analysis of scraping can actually give you the Facebook pages, the blogs, the Pinterest pages. So all these things are helping to boost whatever he's tweeting. There's Google Plus pages everywhere in here, and I know that Google Plus is a graveyard for social media. But what you're seeing is like a lot of these actors, misinformation, propaganda, are, they're all signed up for Google Plus. Like they have Pinterest pages. They're using every single available mechanism, which makes sense because this is kind of regular SEO in a way. But it's frightening because they're using it to influence kind of behaviors on a kind of democratic level. So I'll come back to that as well. That's my Wikipedia example. Why am I going? So the next thing that I wanted to do, I actually was speaking with Dave Carroll at the New School, and he works in ad tech. I'll come back to this. I have lots of goodies later. The next thing that I wanted to do was kind of scrape the underside. So this first round that I went into it was 117 kind of fake. I mean, these were bad websites. I mean, most of them were not. I mean, even nice to go to and look at, if much less like frequent. So I wanted to kind of capture what was being loaded on computers, right? And this is where it gets into hacking. So if you think about the URLs as the top side, like this would be kind of the underside, or the infrastructure that supports it. I used a really simple tool. It's Mozilla's Lightbeam, but I used it because I could export the data out of that tool. So it'll show you the network, but you can also kind of capture that JSON data out of it. So, but when I started going to these websites and I looked back at where I had been, again, a lot of these things are normal. Every time you visit one website, right? How many third parties do you visit? Like usually, multiple. But for this, it was about 4.5. I think it was about 4.5 third parties. So I went to 117 websites and I visited around 473 third parties. Like it's not that, it's not that big. But if you kind of look at the center of the graph, you can see which entity is kind of at the center of all of the tracking, and which entity might have all the data for any type of bad things that people have done or kind of hacking. So will they give it to you? Probably never. Or would they release it? I mean, it's completely against their interest. But Facebook is at the center of this. And when I opened a virtual machine and kind of put every level of protection that I could outside of that. And I went to some of these sites, which are completely, some of them are completely bogus. Some of them are partial truths. There's a whole range of different sites. But I started to see that they were branded Facebook. I mean, in a way, there was Facebook everywhere. There were Facebook like this page. And this page had 20,000 Facebook likes at the time that I went to it. A lot of these sites some of these sites had hundreds of thousands of Facebook page likes. I mean, that makes no sense. I mean, they have no kind of presence at all. Of course, you can buy likes. Everyone knows this. So again, who would go to Secrets of the Fed and like it on Facebook? It's like a conspiracy. You wouldn't be on Facebook. You'd be, I don't know what platform you'd be on right now, like Ello or some type of alt platform. So again, these things, when I visited these websites, it started to confirm the patterns that I saw in the referral data from kind of what was coming upstream. So lots of email pop-ups, like for kind of really pushing people to sign up for email list. And also this kind of, it's kind of horrible social engineering, but there was a lot of this kind of thing where it's like, would you like to see Hillary in prison? Click like if you agree. But if you didn't have kind of ad block, multiple ad block things like I do, it would be probably hard for a normal person to get past this. Or it would, I didn't see it on my phone, but it could very well like stop you from trying to get on that page. And of course I want. It's like let me in. So, but this is the kind of thing that I saw that reinforced a lot of the network level analysis or the patterns that kind of were being exhibited. So I went back to every single one of these, or every single one that I could tie directly back to a website. But I went to all of their Facebook pages and kind of systematically captured the number of Facebook likes at the time. And they added up to 15 million. Like this is like less than 100 sites. Does that make sense? Absolutely not. These are more kind of, but the average number of likes for sites with more than 100 followers, to kind of like take away that long tail, was about 140,000 likes. I mean, that makes no sense. These things are basically, a template like thrown up with a couple of WordPress scripts. So I'm going to move. So this is kind of the shadow of this fake news. And I think that it's just starting to emerge, the conversation, especially with media. So media are obsessed with like how Facebook influenced the election. I mean, I'm talking mass media. And how Twitter, how Trump uses Twitter. But like, thankfully, ad tech is just starting to kind of come into this conversation of how people are being tracked, how privacy is important, what you can do to kind of protect yourself from these types of, I mean, you'd have to kind of prove manipulation, but these types of campaigns. So it's also a lot of the research right now to be a little bit critical, like how do we capture things that are kind of ephemeral? Like how do you capture these kind of videos that pop up that you have to kind of swipe off of your like widgets on your iPhone. How do we capture the microseconds that people slow down, or kind of that deceleration period when they're kind of scrolling their Facebook newsfeed? So most of the quantitative research that I've seen involving misinformation and kind of fake news focuses a lot on when people, because they can measure it, when people click on a link and go out of Facebook, that you can capture that type of data. But in the app or inside the actual platform, it's going to be very, very difficult to capture. But Facebook, of course, knows these types of things. They monitor these types of metrics for advertising purposes. So, and kind of trends in the future that I'm seeing is, that kind of ended up terrible, but so we have people talking that worked on campaigns. This was one of the consultants for Ted Cruz's campaign, who worked with all of these organizations like Cambridge Analytica. But he says, he thinks the future is actually in wearables, and these companies could very well be in cooperation in future elections with kind of maybe when an ad goes out, or when there's kind of an engagement on an ad, maybe heart rate, pulse. So he says that we already have the ability to measure people's emotional reactions, from blood pressure to heart rate to facial recognition. And facial recognition is obviously already being used. So he says you can combine that with traditional survey and other technologies. Why should we rely on what an audience says in terms of polling or surveys when we can just connect to their Fitbit and see their facial reactions? So I mean, you have people talking about this right now. So how does this relate to kind of this post-truth environment? Like, how do we, when we're kind of getting news and information that we agree with, and there's a confirmation bias, I'm not going to go into this can of worms, but essentially, how do we deal with this from a research perspective or a productive to kind of move things forward? So more and more, I'm seeing just layers being added on to every single tool. And these, I'm sure that a lot of people know these types of things, but instant predictions, for example, autocomplete. I think autocomplete is one of the most crucial points of injection for propaganda and kind of for kind of pushing certain types of agendas, because you're getting people at the point, whether they stop and use that autocomplete prediction or not, you're getting people at the point where they're actually actively engaged in a process to search for something, whether it be truth, facts, and that is really, really important. So I think that a lot of the campaigns, again, this is anecdotal, but from the data that I've collected, I think that a lot of the work isn't necessarily to get to the top of Google or to prove something is right, but actually to kind of work and get into that autocomplete, because it's maybe the most important, in my opinion, injection point for terms, propaganda, thoughts. Even if people use it or not, they're still being exposed. So again, more and more kind of complexity in what used to be fairly simple search tools. Years ago they did My Google or Google plus My World, but now I'm noticing there's a verbatim. So Google doesn't necessarily search anymore for your keywords or what you enter. It searches for something like it. It kind of takes it and categorizes it, and then searches for that topic. And that's exactly why when you look for something in trends, it gives you that entity, because it's tied to entities. So you have to actually turn it to verbatim to get your actual query. So Google doesn't even work like it used to. And this was kind of slipped in a few months ago, maybe last year. And it changes. When you put it to verbatim, it completely changes Google, and it kind of makes it more like the old Google without all of the other verticals, and it's more minimalist. I thought that was interesting. I don't know. A lot of people just don't, So quizzes, obviously, the kinds of data siphoning that is going on too. Yeah.
Sorry, so instant reaction. So, I mean, what kind of things can you do on this completion thing? I mean, are you saying that if I search Hillary Clinton, then it's going to say Hillary Clinton is a wonderful person, and if you do, then it's Hillary Clinton is whatever?
Absolutely, it's personalized, but I mean, so this is the problem, right? It's scale. How do can you stand behind every single person at every point in time when they're looking for something? So what kinds of data samples would be reliable for this type of personalization? I mean, it becomes a really big from a study perspective. It becomes a really big kind of sampling problem. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you could take a kind of selected sample and watch people.
You don't have any quantitative data on this kind of
So I'll come back. I'll try to come back to that. I feel it's like a little bit off, but yeah, I'll try to come back to that and deal with that later. So what I'm seeing more and more of as well, these are more observations because I'm going to get into some deeper data, is that there's lots of frames for your, there's lots of ways that companies are building, like Facebook is one of the best at this. They're building this framework to kind of connect your, not your thoughts or not the articles that you share, but your actual identity. So I'm seeing a lot of people add, it's not just like a terror event or kind of Paris or, but it's turning into political parties. And if you go into Facebook and try to change your profile picture, like if you were to do that right now, you get a whole host of things ranging from all the way from like ultra conservative, like Jesus is great frame, all the way into kind of, it's a really diverse, like crazy, weird kind of, they're pushing things like decorate your identity with like a political topic or an issue. So I'll come back to a few of those topics in a second. One of the things that people asked me after I did the first kind of fake news map was, okay, well, what about the left wing? If this is the kind of the hard right misinformation, like what is the left wing, or what does that look like? So as best I could, because there's not a list of kind of fake news sites on the left, but I took a sample of kind of the important media on the left, or what I would consider influential. And what you see is that it's kind of very clustered and very centralized in kind of in the corner of the network. So it's very much, when you look at these bigger maps, and here we go. Let's see if my computer can take this. Macs are terrible with dual screen. They're awful. I've done nothing but like complain about this Mac because, come on. Okay, so I'm going to drag over my graphing tool. This is like some pretty heavy duty. I'm sure it can. So if you were to map the whole ecosystem, let's close this out. This is what it would look like. I took both. This is the kind of 117 fake news sites. I took a sample of the kind of more influential, larger right-wing media. Fox News would be, Breitbart, and I took the left wing and I merged the two networks to see what does the whole ecosystem of news or kind of political news look like. And this was right after the election. So this data is like a sample from, it's a snapshot from kind of right after the election. And what you see, I coded them red. The ones that have no color are the ones that are the entities that were connected through URLs by both sides of so they're kind of the middle ground. So I coded the websites, or they're more than websites, they're Facebook profiles, they're Twitter profiles. I coded the ones that fell onto the right and only linked to right-wing sites as red, and kind of, so it's more of a polarization graph. What you see, you see the same pattern as before. You see YouTube as kind of influential in this. Let me drop this into a bigger. So the granularity of this is insane. You can literally trace back like one tweet back to kind of origins. And you can also trace it back, which I'll get into, which is a really important point that I kind of wanted to make here. You can also trace it back to like server technologies, and you can also trace it back to resources and how assets are being delivered. But just as a pattern, one of the things that you see here, let's play this like the zoom in game. Nope. And I can adjust the fonts and whatnot. Come on, just give me like something in between. Okay. There we go. So what you see here is that, in the Guardian article, the reporter uses the kind of analogy that they're surrounded, that kind of the media ecosystem is surrounded by kind of far-right actors and misinformation. It's from this type of research, from this network graph, it's kind of true in that they're ubiquitous. They're all over the map. And the kind of left-wing and more liberal media are pushed over in kind of a corner. and not so their ability. And this, this has other effects because it's like the reporters don't get off the coast or all these other arguments. But when you start to look at the bigger picture in here, the kind of strategy. I don't want to use football games like the football game diagram. So it's really interesting where actors are positioned. Where is he? So it's cropped, but this is Trump's account. So Trump's Twitter, which is from a PageRank perspective, or from a trust perspective in terms of like reputation and domain reliability, he's up there with like the New York Times. I mean, he's competing in if you could measure the PageRank of it, he's very, very influential. Links that he retweets. He's also indexed by Google. Basically, he's splitting. He's on the edge of the kind of center right, and in between, from a network perspective, the New York Times and the Washington Post. So I find this I found it really interesting. I mean, I wouldn't call it cutting off, but this is a really strategic position, next to Pinterest and Instagram, and kind of in between the New York Times, the Washington Post, and CNN. Does anyone have any comments about like this type of? Yeah.
Any comment? So it's pretty clear that you've organized it, and you can see the positions people are taking. The graphs that are not colored, those are you consider them neutral?
I wouldn't consider them neutral. I would consider them, so they were linked by both kind of sides. So they're meeting points, or yeah, I guess yeah. So
They're mixed.
they're mixed, yeah. And I just left the color out to make the graph more readable. You could color them purple, I guess, if you really wanted to. Purple might actually be worse than not coloring them because it would. So when you look at certain people and certain actors, I don't know if this is the best way to do it, but you see people like Rachel Maddow on here, and you'll see red and blue all over the place because they're sites of controversy. So her tweets bring in kind of trolls, and you can see the mix, the kind of blending, like red and blue marbles. Alec Baldwin is also on this, and it's there's a mix of all sorts of accounts. There'll be not Nazi King 666 like tweeting at Alec Baldwin. There'll be Meryl Streep like replying to him. And so like the more controversial and outspoken actors on this, you can see attract kind of bring in. So in a way, this is also kind of a censor system. Like when Ellen DeGeneres tweets about something or tweets a photo, it kind of activates this infrastructure that kind of brings in the trolls in a way. So just some interesting network analysis points. Does anyone use Gephi here? It's an open source tool. I mean, I find it crashes. It can be a real pain, but I think it's really powerful. It's amazing. If you can if you have a good graphics card and you can kind of deal with the slowness and the bugginess. That's not exactly. If you blow up your graphics card. Okay, this is a big one. So I flipped this map sideways. So one of the things about what do they call them, hairball graphs, is that you don't get all the perspective. The top-down view is like for a graph, especially for layers of kind of media and layers of an ecosystem. So I used creative methods to kind of flip this around, just to see the depth of this. This is why Gephi is, and there's no Control-Z in Gephi. I was actually going to make a T-shirt. Like you look for Control-Z, and then it's like it's not. But so this kind of shows you who's at the top of the food chain in a way, from a linking perspective. So this would be specifically this map is URLs inbound. So this is an in-degree. This is kind of, and let's see here. So rents.com in the kind of right-wing ecosystem was unusually influential in terms of how it's linked. And again, what that implies ultimately, I've never tried this before, actually. It's working better than I've never dared to put on an actual live Gephi map. So infinite unknown, this is kind of a very bizarre conspiracy. So there's also a lot of natural health and natural foods, hence the InfoWars connections. But a lot of the issues kind of filter their way through natural health and natural supplement sites. Self-improvement through various life extension type of.
What's the connection between those?
Well, I was reading that they're looking for.
I'll use a different map because it's this is too big.
They advertise the same people advertise on InfoWars as on
They're great targets, right? They're naturally very good targets for conspiracy, for instantly kind of grab yeah.
So this is the nutraceutical multi-level.
Nutraceutical would be, yep,
Yeah, it's
absolutely.
Why Nigerians say they're from Nigeria paper. Yeah.
So don't know how much, I just want to be careful with time. Let me go back to my presentation and then I'll try to finish up. This was definitely too big to. Okay, so this is a snapshot of the larger graph that I showed earlier. So there's kind of activity going on, and this is just starting to be reported on in the media, the kind of mass media as well, of kind of these alternative, there's an alternative ecosystem of resources or information resources. So Conservapedia would be one of them. And this network analysis can kind of confirm that Conservapedia is, they're linking out a lot. So linking out is different than being linked into, but Rents and Conservapedia are hubs of this ecosystem in a way. And I don't know, Conservapedia might not be important now, but essentially what people are doing is trying to build right-wing Wikipedia. So when we talk about common ground and finding places to meet and kind of finding ways to kind of connect, this is the worst. I mean, from an information resource perspective, like Conservapedia and Liberalpedia or whatever the other, it's very worrying. Rents is natural health, I believe, or connected somehow to natural health. So just to kind of wrap up for fake news and kind of the research on fake news, it's not the word that I would choose to use, but it is because it's been used so much that it's become something that is actually a topic, not only from a singular perspective, but also from a organizational, which the word fake news is increasingly being used as organizational, like it's being used to target organizations for credibility. Part of this fake news, like retweeting, and part of this whole dialogue is through, a lot of people probably here study bots or you study automated accounts. This is a map of what I would consider and I can tell you about the research later in the next 2 days that I'm here, of the most influential, the Scur Finger Poking account is, I would consider that the most influential Twitter account based on a lot of data through the last week of the election and probably through the entire general election in terms of impact. So he runs 2 accounts. This turned into a Washington Post story. I found the bot, and the reporter for the Post went out and found the person and interviewed him. And he's like he's a retiree, lives under the airport in Chicago. He just kind of sits at home. He's half blind and just schedules tweets, or so he says. But his account says differently because there's a Python, a lot of his tweets are coming from other third-party apps. So but again, network, you can see this, of course, Trump is going to be center of even, this would be a tweet network, not a URL network. And these are the other, I took these out just to kind of not, just to be fair to the other accounts. They're definitely automated or bots, but I just took out the names. But those are the other influential. So there's pockets of kind of, these are, what are the people in the Lord of the Rings, like the guys that chase the undead? Yeah, exactly. Those are the ring race essentially.
So you think this guy is not really, so he's being a middleman, basically?
So when you go back and you can, on the API, you can pull which accounts. So about 10% of his tweets come from Twitter web client, and about 2% come from a measurement tool, and the rest come from this third-party app that's basically unidentifiable. But and you can look at the schedule of his tweets. His tweets run 24 hours a day, basically 7 days a week. I mean, he's not up. And again, a lot of this is already marketing, right? People set up these accounts in Hootsuite to promote their service or product. So this illusion of support is, in terms of research, is really important as well. And just, I don't know if people might know about this, but I think that if you can get into gab.ai, I think it's one of the strategic points for kind of operations of far-right fringe media. Most of the kind of influential accounts, like they clearly post their gab.ai. It's a closed social network. And the waiting list on it is probably months, I think, to get in. And they probably vet you before they would let you in. Yeah, Susan.
So I'm wondering, if you're looking mostly, it looks like it's kind of just like accounts and URLs and things like that.
Yeah.
Files. Have you done, or do you think there's any value in doing kind of content analysis? Because one thing that I've heard about is you mentioned the idea of having these sort of political identities that I can, change my profile image or something like that to be political. I've also heard about people essentially when they give access to a campaign or a campaign in the generic sense, to give it access to a social media handle so that they're actually tweeting messages that appear to come.
I'll show you. I'll show this. So his reach was, we're looking at, where's the? If you add up these two accounts, in some instances, like he was getting about 32 million impressions per day. Like that account that I showed is kind of one of the most influential. Now, I guess the next question is are these real people? Like how many of the 32 million impressions that are being counted? But from a trending perspective and kind of an influence perspective in terms of how Twitter quantifies what's important, it's huge. So for making a topic trend or for getting it or up to the top of a hashtag really quickly, like that's also really important, is to get a tweet, kind of issue-based tweet or polarized tweet kind of to the top of that hashtag so when people search. Yeah.
How would this compare with like an organic campaign that this is a lot of science?
Oh, I mean, the quickest way to kind of identify that is like there's usually with organic there's a lull, right? Like you can see a lull and then you see the reaction, whereas most automated accounts are kind of, they're still training them to wait, but I think that most of them are kind of a very steep, like 90-degree, straight up basically, or yeah, very very sharp in terms of like if you were to look at the line graph, whereas human is more like
reaction time.
Yeah, to post. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different, but usually I think that that's going to change, right? I mean, the technology is going to get to the point where they can like clone that better, or they can train the bots like for a delay, or based on what kind of event it is, if it's breaking. Sad news is different, how people respond. So the other thing I did was I used IBM's Watson, which is a great tool. A lot of people, like, you have access to it if you're teaching faculty. IBM will give you free access to it. And it'll pull hashtag level data, but I used that tool to find which accounts had over, say, 100,000 tweets in total on specific hashtags and map that out. So this also led me back to that kind of majorly influential Twitter account that I showed earlier. But what you see is like these accounts are just dominating hashtags. So over and over again, this was Drain the Swamp, Crooked Hillary. You see these accounts that are just repeatedly like blasting political hashtags. And again, I mean, this is fairly simple stuff, but all of this is adding up in terms of putting things in people's faces, putting certain messages, making things trend, top of hashtags. So for a content analysis, from that map that I showed in the beginning of this section for tweets, these are the keywords. This is the word map of those tweets that were made from that Trump in the middle graph. So very timely, like timely to the point, like suspiciously timely, right? I mean, some of the topics in here were from something that happened that day or the day before. So this is the type of speed that this kind of reactionary, whether it be pushed through Twitter or WordPress, any type of other accounts, like it's coming out very quickly. It's very coordinated.
Jonathan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's the example of the person, like the split between what he tweets on, because he says that he writes all of his own tweets and schedules them, but they're coming from PJNet, which is a known kind of, they have hashtag rallies, they recruit people. Yeah.
Yeah. What kind of, so, because the impression I'm getting is that this is highly automated, right? So are we talking about like a very small group of people could be running this, or is this a large group of people that are somehow coordinating, or what do you
I mean, there's going to be multiple groups, I guess, coordinating, and to trace that back. So I mean, like, how do you trace back these things? I mean, you can use, I gave up. I mean, you can use DNS, you can use like reverse IP. There's all sorts of different ways, but it's really difficult. And when you find that person who's coordinating these types of operations, like, then what? Like, what do you, like, how do you go from there? Let me just try to finish up this part. So there's the number. This is from TweetReach. It's from Union Metrics. It's a fairly reliable estimate. So 32 million was his estimated reach or impressions from 2 a.m. in the morning to 4 p.m. I mean, that's not even 24 hours. So I talked about delegitimization. So it's in the AP style guide now, unfortunately, like the word fake news. I just thought I would share that. It's depressing, but it's only to be used for deliberate falsehoods in quotes. That's the Patriot Journalist Network. So these are the types of entities that are organizing a lot of this activity and probably setting up the scripts and setting up all the infrastructure to recruit people like that don't have, that have low level of technological skills to kind of log in and authenticate, not just Twitter, but also Facebook, and kind of hand over their voice to these types of entities. And they've been in trouble before. They're very careful to not push over Twitter's API limits. I think the PJNet has been, I think, they've been blocked or banned or suspended by Twitter. So, but finding these, these are the kind of first level of coordination, these types of things. And you see them in tweets. You have to decode things often. So all of this added up together, how the websites are linked together, the types of keywords, the types of activity, the social signals, the tweets, the trends, you put all these together, and what you're ending up with is you're getting these kind of no-name sites or sites that really shouldn't be at the top of list, just dominating things that have anything to do with politics or health or society or culture. So CNS News is a recent example. So I pulled kind of a keyword analysis. So this is an SEO report. And I mean, again, very, very timely. These sites can go to the top of Google on an issue like transgender mental illness, in a matter of days. So companies have entire marketing teams to kind of keep even on the first page or just to make sure they have presence somewhere. These can kind of skyrocket. And the question is how? So if I were to go back in the graph, I can pull data based on proximity. I can pull data based on PageRank, based on eigenvector centrality, based on all sorts of different metrics. Combine that with like the number of shares, the number of likes. But how do you explain these types of things? So Google's gotten under control a little bit, but it's still happening. When you type in certain topics, or especially if it's a newer or emerging topic, I'm like tempted to say fake news sites, but these kind of very hyper-polarized or hyper-partisan sites. CNS News, Media Research Center is another one, MRC. One American News Network. These are this is the batch of state-sponsored media that's kind of just starting to emerge. They're skyrocketing to the top for any type of health, like sexual, reproductive health care, abortion, all of these things. And so one last thing that I'll show here. When I traced back, remember YouTube in the first slide, or the first map? YouTube is kind of the center of that network. One of the links that I traced back was an Amazon CloudFront link. And that CloudFront link led me back to a bunch of sketchy YouTube channels that were automating posts. So what they would do is, they would essentially pull text from different news articles. They would compile them, make a slideshow behind it, speak that text out in a robot or a computer voice, and then bundle it, put a bunch of keywords on it, and upload it to YouTube. So they were putting so many videos up so fast that I was actually like, while I was collecting, 100 more went up. So this is a company, that's exists. They're called Tip Top Technologies. I looked at the backgrounds of some of these people. They're, some of them are loosely affiliated with IBM's Watson Research Center. So let me get out of this here. And does anyone have any questions while I've covered a lot of, I wanted to get through this so I can talk about you in the next couple of days, because I have data I could show you, but trying to do this in a presentation format would just be, it would be futile. Yeah.
People are being pulled into these networks and people are staying in the networks. Can you kind of say which is the more dominant effect?
Well, so I think, yeah, that's a really good question, because, a lot of the older, I guess people always ask me, like, what's the difference between, now and say what Obama did or what their campaigns did in terms of recruiting and grassroots and organizing. I would say the pull factor is huge. There's a lot of, they're using targeting in kind of a magnetic or kind of pull rather than pushing out certain messages or pushing out certain content. One of the best examples of that is just like the use of Amazon. Amazon is everywhere, CloudFront, S3, all the assets for these organizations, all of their documents that they want out, all of their pre-made memes, the meme templates, I call them, for Bad Hillary, they all host them on Amazon because it's cheap and because they only need to pay for what goes out, and nothing will crash if they have high volume. So over and over again, CloudFront links are all over the place. And this is a whole nother, I don't have a whole lot of time, but tracing back those servers and those, because they all go back to one bucket, right? Which means that they're probably paid for by a single entity, probably a super PAC. But again, how do you trace these things is the question I'm kind of like pushing off. Like, how can we connect the dots? Like, take the next step. This is the map. Like, how do you start connecting the dots? Amazon, in particular, is interesting because, not only they're serving a lot of the rich content, they're serving it on a geolocation basis. So the kind of customization that AWS can do, in CloudFront, they can serve things based on what type of phone you have, cookies that can sit on other servers, and these are all being used to tailor content, even down to the headline or potentially. So it's beyond geolocation. It's beyond kind of a simple ad ID on your phone. It's kind of, this stuff is going all the way down to probably psychographic level, hardware level. So if you have iOS 1 version, you can serve them actually different content at the asset level, and keep all your other things on your own website. So. Yeah.
Has anybody tried, or have you tried statistical studies of the vocabulary of these different sites and see how intertwined they might be?
No, I think that's a very good.
I'm specifically asking because of the grammar of the English language, at least.
Yes.
You can say things in a way that say you're not sure of the source versus grammatical forms that state something in a way as though it were a fact, as though you believe the source to itself be describing truth. And it seems that one of the traps that a lot of very legitimate sites get into, and Columbia journalists
Sure.
should know about this, I don't know, use the phraseologies as though they are not questioning the source, rather than questioning the source. So a keyword idea for that statistical study vocabulary would be alleged, or hypothetical, or blah, blah, versus flat is the case. As a reference to a source versus just asserting a fact, even though you just got it on some.
Yeah, I mean, that type of thing would definitely be productive. I mean, again, can you do this at scale? Can you do this, like, how would you kind of normalize it across a bunch of different websites? So a lot of this has been observations, but if you look, like, you can see things, like you can see this. It's a lot of this isn't hidden, or it isn't. There was one that I found. I was like, what is this app? And then it led me back. I went back to the company, and it's called Political Social Media LLC, and they basically build issue-based apps. So when you go to the app, right? Guess what it wants you to do? Follow. It's a training app. So just like again, log it. You get incentive. You get points. It's gamified. How many points you get to recruit your friends to follow Trump on Twitter. So that was the. Which one was that one? That was the America First. There's the NRA. They make one for the NRA. You get a free gun after you bring in 200 of your friends. You get a free Beretta 9mm. I don't know. I'm just.
You shoot it, then you get more.
No bullets though. That would be illegal. So lead right, and then there's the Catholic vote. There was one that had a great. Invite your friends. You get so all this type of thing. I mean, again, no one talks about these. I've never seen anyone with, and I would be scared to install one of these. I would never install it probably unless it was a burner phone or something. But it is interesting, I guess. Yeah.
So this is kind of a really high-level, ridiculous question in some sense, but you seem to be taking large views and stuff. So I thought I'd give it a shot.
Sure.
It's a little hard to juxtapose all of this stuff going on, which seems to be, for the most part, in your analysis, these sort of right-wing elements, while at the same time, in general, the impression that is generally out there, for what this is all worth at that point, of all the people developing all the tech and doing all this, all the companies you cited. Those people are all, tend to be characterized as sort of leaning left and stuff. So there's this kind of weird thing where all the tech-savvy people are producing all this stuff, which all the people who are not reputed to be all that tech-savvy are clearly knowing how to they are very savvy.
Yeah.
So do you have any kind of inkling about how, why that dichotomy is there?
That's a great question. I mean, because I mean, I use the example of just the really kind of low-level example of someone essentially being recruited for their authentication details, right, for their login, you can see this in the maps. They're bringing people in, they're getting control of they're broadcasting.
People who are doing the bringing in are obviously very sophisticated.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, is building a Python app to tweet something? I mean, sure. But yeah, I totally understand. Yep, there's a higher level, absolutely. Yeah. So I mean, the apps are another example of that. Sure. I mean, it's the firms that when you look on Ted Cruz, So again, I think the focus Cambridge Analytica has been a little bit overblown.
It's the Republicans did this, and then Obama beat them at their game. It's the Republicans were doing targeted stuff long before the Dems. And then the Dems beat them at their game in 2008, 2012. And now they're.
Well, it still doesn't count.
I'll just show this.
We have many questions now.
So if you go so here's another problem, right? You go back, you try to find there's the FEC. You're required to kind of report campaign spending, right? Well, there's a super PAC problem, but there's also just the data problem. Because when you go back and you pull information on, say, Ted Cruz, you have all of these different media buys from different consultancies. Some people worked on his campaign, they came out as an independent contractor. There's refunds of donations going on. There's all sorts of weird things in these. But okay, Political Social Media LLC. That quote that I said about emotional targeting and about wearables, that was the owner of that firm. This is the Ted Cruz spending. It's a sample of his kind of spending. But this is the problem with tracing back Cambridge and of course Facebook as well, right? What's digital consulting? And the same thing happens when they bought ads on Facebook. And Amazon is even worse because it just says Amazon. It doesn't even say Amazon Web Services or Amazon Web Hosting or so because there's no requirement to explain anything more than just give them a receipt, the purpose, the date, and you're done. You wrap it up, but it leaves the public in complete darkness in terms of okay, well, what did they place? What ads did they place? So at least having that would, how many ads? How many people? Yeah.
You look at data and you mentioned also some digital consulting, but if you also look at the meanwhile very fast-growing number of startups
Yep. If there's no oversight really of this kind of thing, then yeah, absolutely, there's a lot of money to be made if you can develop tools that can get things done or get the results that someone wants. Yeah, and the UK is basically, I mean, the UK is a little bit stricter, I guess, in terms of like the Information Protection Act, but it's still, I mean, like regulating that would be. I haven't looked into organizations, because I think that there's other people that are kind of looking on things and connecting things at an organizational level and maybe looking at business registrations or business license. But again, it gets into forensics, because you have to, like, they registered, but if they have some kind of generic name, you have to go and tie that in, or see the owners and where they're linked into. Patents are actually, I've looked into patents. That's the one thing. So. Yeah. Yep. He patently denied any allegations, like straight in the camera. I watched the, yeah. But again, how do you, like, this is the problem. Like, how do we connect the dots?
We have 5 minutes left.
Yep. Any others? Yeah.
But so what's great here? I mean, I can't find a lot, right? Because, I mean, you'll say, well, okay, so somebody's made an app to, recruit friends into supporting, tweeting of Trump. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that fundamentally, right? So where are the gray areas that you were seeing here?
I think that so we can, like in the UK, you can request data that companies hold about you. But you can't, you're not allowed, because it's confidential or it's proprietary, how it reaches you, or the mechanism, or if you're being targeted, right? So I guess that's the kind of discrepancy. That's the missing part of the puzzle. It's like, sure, you're holding a bunch of, but the formula is being used, or how it's reaching, or how it's being used to influence, like, yeah.
So isn't that a bit in the direction of highly personalized and highly targeted messaging that is dependent on sophisticated profiles that are built through tracking? Is that, Jonathan, is that something that is going on? Or?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely profiling, but again, it's messy. I mean, how do you regulate that type of data compiling, or
for example,
and keep businesses intelligent?
Looked at the trackers that are embedded in this sites, and the fingerprinting scripts they might have, or.
So for that, that data set, for that big data set that had Facebook in the middle, I shared that. Like I dumped, it's online. You can download it and play around with it. Yeah, I kind of stopped like at that level, where I was looking at the scripts, I was looking at the domains. I mean, clearly you can see some of these sites are, very sketchy, while some are kind of not quite so bad. But knowing what kinds of scripts, like a lot of these weren't secure. A lot of these, the information going back and forth, especially from an ad tech level, like there's nothing, it was kind of wide open. So yeah, I mean, you could definitely study the fingerprinting of or you could study you could kind of, from a forensics perspective, you could trace that back to, but it's going to have to be something that's creative, because they're using all sorts of tricks to, beyond just like anonymous domain registration. They're using every single mechanism to hide identity, or the kind of the underpin of like the controller of this type of operations. Yeah.
So I guess a question I have is how much of this sort of is driven by, like, you think that a lot of this is sort of non-organic activity in a lot of ways, and that if some of these central players were more sophisticated perhaps about not being manipulated by non-organic activity,
Yeah.
that it would be, that these things would have a lot
Less.
smaller reach?
I think so, yeah. I think that giving people a reason, like, just, or that the kind of idea that, like, I don't want to be fooled, or it's, like, just making it unpopular or uncool to be, like, misled in a way. I mean, that's kind of a marketing campaign, but these types of marketing campaigns have been used for this purpose before. I wanted to show Pizzagate just super quick. I did a map of Pizzagate, and it gets to a lot of what multiple people are talking about. And I just wanted to show it, because it's really interesting, because it shows the origins and it shows the end, and that's kind of why. And Gephi is not.
Do you see the intermediaries?
Yes.
Making changes?
I have a Pizzagate like a map that shows literally like you can see it jump over from Reddit and 4chan into other places and kind of end up, and then you can see where it emerges in Google and also in like Washington Post. But where is it? I'll just show the PDF because I give up on the.
Yeah, I think we're reaching the end of the session.
Yep.
So maybe.
This is a horrible PDF. Like I just couldn't find the actual graph file. But can you see this this pattern here? So yeah, Facebook down here, and you have some links in between. One of them is Trump, right? If you trace this back, you can actually see like the coordination between 4chan, between at the top is Twitter. Most of those accounts, the ones in between the connectors of the hubs up there, are bots. So every single account that I went and pulled that were kind of linking in between the clusters were clearly automated or clearly some type of like coordination going on. And Google Plus, like Google Plus is in a lot of sites, but again, I guess it's the bigger picture here because if you can trace these kinds of things back, you can see the injection points in a way. Yeah.
Do you have the data that would let you show the time evolution of this graph?
Yes. So yeah, this gets into the kind of temporal problem, right? When you're trying to capture something, you can use Google. So you could potentially use Google to kind of, because Google does archive most of this, and you could use Google's index to kind of recreate something from a network perspective. But you'd have to be careful about which sites that you pulled, or which domains that you actually pulled information from. For this, I used Reddit, I used 4chan, but not everything is going to be indexed if it's closed.
If you have that data and you can animate it, could you put a soundtrack on it, throw it up on YouTube? It would be a very educational thing.
With a gunshot at the end?
Yeah.
Like a pickup truck in the beginning, and then it comes like.
It'd be low effort. I think a lot of people would be interested to see it if you made it entertaining like that.
Yeah, this is horrible. I'm like embarrassed to show this, but I just couldn't find the graph file. It's much better.
I think with this we
All right.
reached the end of the session, so let's thank Jonathan.
Thanks.
Jonathan is staying with us until the end, so
Yeah.
feel free to.
I wanted to throw a bunch of ideas out, and then
Further questions.
all the data is like the actual raw data. I can talk about it or share it or.
Well, maybe we can put some links up on the program.
We're back at 2 p.m., right? 2 p.m.?
So we might do the session.
My voice is gone.
Yeah, well, that was good.
Is that okay?
Yeah,
All right.
thank you.
I took it like freestyle a little bit.
Yeah, I think now you'll have I saw people warming to questions. Okay, I'm gonna go very quickly because I need to get my
So what do we have next?
So now it's food, lunch.
Oh, okay.
So you have your tickets there, but mine are in my dorm, so
Okay.
I'm gonna pick them up
Okay.
and I'll see you guys in 5 minutes.
Sounds good.